Hello and welcome to Anatomy of Fiction. In today's video, we will be discussing the Fallout 3 DLC, The Pit. More specifically, what is the best decision to make in the ending of this DLC? To make this decision, we should go through the main questline of The Pit. This DLC begins with a quest into the pit. The Lone Wanderer picks up on a distress signal from an escaped slave by the name of Werner. This distress signal contains an intriguing message for anyone adventuring the wastes.
To anyone who can hear me, my name is Werner. I come from a settlement to the north. I have information of great value to anyone willing to help me free my people. Please, help us. This message repeats.
There is a settlement in the north in need of your help. Sounds very Fallout 4, if you ask me. After deciding to follow the trail of the distress signal, it takes you far north. With a long walk through the empty wastes, you eventually find the man by the name of Werner. However, he is not alone. You find him in need of rescuing from pit raiders. Once you have saved his life, he will tell you about the pit and the sickness that plagues the former city. However, there is a cure, but it has not been made available to the citizens of the pit. Instead, it is being hidden and hoarded by the leader of the pit raiders, Ishmael Ashur. But not for long. Werner has come up with a plan that would allow for everyone to be cured there. Although you can't just waltz up and knock on the gate, no, things are never that easy. Otherwise, this game would be much shorter. So to be let in, you must look the part. No fancy power armor or vault suits. To get the right uniform for this job, you have to go see a group of slavers, with their leader Ramsey. He won't just give you the clothes though. For this, you either need to get rid of the slavers or buy the slave. Once you enter the pen, you can either grab one of the suits from the no longer living slave and ignore the guy who is living, or you can talk to Prosper, the other guy in the pen. With talking to Prosper, you could threaten him, or you could tell him he's free. Once dressed in your new clothes, you head into a train tunnel, using the old-style handcart to get you through the tunnel and to the train yard. You let Werner talk to the guards, but as it seems with Werner and any pit raiders, there is no peaceful conversation. The pit raiders recognize him as an escapee, and a firefight breaks out. Once again, you have to help Werner survive the pit raiders. After this fight, this is where you part ways with Werner. However, you are not on your own on this quest. Werner tells you that once you walk through those gates, you need to find someone by the name of Medea. She will help you. Here, you go in unarmed, unless you ask for a weapon that you can conceal. Now you make your way through the gates of the pit, through the dangerous city in the wasteland. If sneaky enough, you can manage to avoid the wild men, who have become deranged due to their exposure to radiation and the toxins in the pit, as well as the not-so-friendly pit raiders. Getting to the gate, you have two options. This will really depend on what you're wearing. Strange, I know. However, it is important. If you go dressed in the slave outfit you were given and go along with the ruse that Werner suggested, pretending to have given up on your escape attempt, you will be lectured about what you have done and be taken back in. If you are dressed differently, this can go one of three ways. You can say that you were an escapee and you gave up, and the same dialogue will occur. Or you can tell Max, the raider guard, you heard the pit raiders were recruiting. Or if none of the above suit you, the final option being you can tell him that you are death and you have come for him. And well, get rid of him. Otherwise, what's the point of telling him you're death? If you choose to try to join or to dispatch of Max, you will meet with another group of raiders. They will speak to you and then you will get knocked out. This is where you get taken into the pit, either knocked out or by walking in as a escaped slave. Now you make your way to Medea, the woman that Werner told you to find. She tells you that your mission is to steal the cure from the leader of the pit, Ashur. However, you would need to blend in before being able to achieve this. Before the plan is really discussed though, you and Medea are interrupted by one of the pit raiders. This is where you get sent out into the steel yard and will have your first run-in with Trogs, the feral mutant humans that are caused by the pit's toxicity. After collecting steel ingots and heading back inside of the mill, you, as the Lone Wanderer, are informed that now is your time to shine. You must fight for your freedom in the hole. This is where, if you manage to survive against the other challengers, you can enact the next part of the plan. Once you head outside, you find Ashur giving a speech to the fellow members of the pit. He asks for people to volunteer to fight in the pit. And Medea, as she stated, was the next part of the plan, volunteers you to fight to the death for your freedom. Ashur accepts your bid for volunteer and allows you to fight in these 3 rounds. With this acceptance, you head down to the hole to meet with Phaedra, who is in charge of arranging these fights. She sends you in for the 3 fights that you need to win to be free. After being declared the winner of these fights, you head to your meeting with Ashur, after retrieving all of your belongings, of course. Once you arrive at Haven, Ashur will speak to you about getting rid of Werner. You can either tell him that you have never met him, or you did not like Werner, or you can of course get rid of Werner. After this, you can ask Ashur about the cure, as this is what you realistically came here for. But as per usual, the cure is no simple remedy. It is not even fully figured out yet. Instead, they have likely a source of a cure, a baby. So let's checkpoint this. Initially, you are sent into the pit by Werner to help free and cure his people. With this, it sounds like a rather noble quest, considering you are essentially Robin Hooding a cure from the rich Lord of the Wastes, and bringing it to the poor people who were forced to be there. But this is not what this really is. Well, considering it was posed as a sidestepping of the truth, nobody said that taking babies would be involved. But hey, how else would you trick a 19-year-old into helping free an entire city and attempting to cure an awful disease spread throughout? However, if someone approached you on the street and said, "Hey, I need your help. Can you take the leader of the city's baby? It will fix everyone's problems." Would you? Seriously, would you actually do it? I believe a lot more explaining would be necessary for that one. Whereas in the case of Ashur, Lord of the Pit, as he calls himself, in his holotapes to Marie, well, he also is not exactly a saint in this story so far either. He does firstly use people brought to the pit from the wastelands as free labor in his steel mill. And for those that do not want to be working for free in the pit, he has a challenge that leads to people fighting to the death to earn their freedom. Not only does he encourage people fighting to the death in an attempt to earn their freedom during their time in the pit, he knowingly exposes them to a disease that causes insanity and horrific mutations. This disease, as of yet, has no available cure. Considering that slaves only see little Marie as a bargaining chip rather than another human being, and that they have no infrastructure to create their own cure, whereas Ashur is at least with his scientist wife trying to fix it, this is where baby Marie should stay, in the care of her parents in the perspective of the future cure. Surely, based on Ashur trying to cure the people of the pit, this is the right decision, or is it? To break this down further, we should continue. But why are we even fighting over a baby? Well, to understand that, we should discuss the sickness found in the pit and the mutants that it produces. Trogs are the final stage of the condition known as troglodyte degeneration contagion, also known as TDC. TDC is believed to be caused by a combination of things that happen to be present in the pit. These are the high levels of radiation from the 3 rivers that feed into the pit, along with the industrial toxins and pollution, all of these found specifically in the former city of Pittsburgh, which is why it is not a contagious disease, meaning you can't catch it from members of the pit. However, you can develop it from spending time in the pit. This is due to the cause being present in both the air and the water. The infection affects everyone differently, but about 20% of people once infected will become Trogs eventually. With all who are infected, their condition becomes worse over time. For most people in the pit, this is just skin lesions. These will ultimately clear up with some time away from the pit, in the so-called fresh wasteland air. For those who experience worse symptoms, these changes are more permanent. This version of the disease beginning to show irreversible symptoms with the stage known as Wildmen. The Wildmen are, for the most part, still appearing as people. They do not have the physical mutations that we see in the Trogs, however, they are considered to be suffering from psychological symptoms. These make the Wildmen hostile, incredibly violent, and have an uncontrollable short temper, becoming insane as the condition worsens. With the Wildmen, after further years of exposure to TDC, they eventually become Trogs, losing all higher reasoning and having decreased motor skills. This is why we see them going from walking on 2 legs, like everyone else, to the weird frog kind of posture that we see them sitting and kinda scooting in. These degenerated mutants, like the Wildmen, are incredibly aggressive toward any non-Trog they find. Trogs, due to the degeneration caused by the disease, are weaker than humans. However, they are much faster and often work and hunt in packs, which is what makes them more dangerous. Trogs do not appear as human anymore. With their appearance, it looks almost as though their skin, has been removed or has kind of fallen off. They look almost decaying with the orangish tinge seen on them, along with the lesions along their muscles. Due to the degeneration caused by this disease, Trogs are feral, with a severely impacted mental state. Don't go trying to make friends with them. This has led Trogs to attack their own friends and family members. There are rumors that Trogs are able to retain memories and recognize the faces of their loved ones. However, this is not proven, and likely to be wrong. We see this with people such as John in the Steelyard attempting to remind his own brother Billy, who has become a Trog. This, however, is not successful, considering his brother is, well, a Trog. This highlighting the aggressiveness of Trogs, considering that Billy would willingly attack his own brother. It is unlikely that they had a fight before he became a Trog, but I can't comment on their relationship. And with this, there is no cure for the transformation into Trogs. So why is the baby so important when it comes to the TDC infection? Prior to the birth of Marie, all babies in the pit turned feral a few weeks after their birth. With children in TDC prevalent areas, almost 100% end up becoming Trogs. The only baby so far to not become a Trog is Marie. She was born with an immunity to what seems like all radiation-based diseases. This of course includes TDC, radiation sickness, and also the development of a sixth toe. Fallout 2 anyone? With this knowledge and the immunity of baby Marie, this suggests that there is a possibility to pass this immunity on to others, considering, unlike other babies, she is not just a mini Trog by now. If this is the case, then this poses the possibility for changes in how the pit is run. However, the question with this, will it be a cure for TDC or will it be prevention, like a vaccination against becoming a Trog? As so far, becoming what is considered wild men and Trogs are not curable. With either of these, is it going to be readily available, provided to the workers for free, or is it going to be difficult to access? Also, how are you going to catch and cure a Trog? They're not exactly friendly. So let's checkpoint this. Now that we know about the infection, would anyone willingly travel to the pit with the risk of becoming a Trog, if they knew about it at least? No. The majority of the people there are brought there by force to work in the steel mill for free. These people are sold into the work by the slavers that are connected to the Paradise Falls settlement after being kidnapped throughout the wasteland. So with this, if there were no people being forced into the pit as workers, there would not be any Trogs, as the Trogs come from years of constant exposure to the TDC. This makes it understandable as to why the members of the pit wanted to take the baby. They knew they were getting sick. Some of them with the mutations that would be irreversible in the future, others had lost family members to these mutations. So the slaves of the pit wanted to use little baby Marie not as a cure, considering that they had no technology, no labs, and no knowledge in how to make the cure, instead as a way to be let free. They saw this as an out rather than curing the disease they had been exposed to. For this, the workers of the pit were willing to risk it all, even their lives for freedom. So without their presence, there would be no need for research into a cure, as there would be no people being forcibly exposed to the TDC, causing potential Trogs. However, with the leaders of the pit, namely Asher and his wife Sandra, who was the scientist, actively working towards curing this, considering that with the nature of the pit having the only known working steel mill, this means that there would have been a similar situation. However, it is likely there would not have been the same approach to TDC, as the likelihood of someone being born with the cure not really stated. With this, if it had been regular raiders, then they definitely would not have had the research set up. With the way the pit is currently run, where people are being put in danger without being compensated, it is understandable for the desire to use the child as a bargaining chip. If the pit was run differently, where people were compensated for the danger and their work, then there would be more of a benefit to the pit. So with how it currently is, this section, a point goes to Werner's rebel group. However, barely. We should go into both sides and the real intentions of their leaders, as this may provide us with some insight into who is really deserving of the baby. Now that we know about the disease and why the baby is important, we should discuss why exactly the slaves want her, and why they may deserve the baby. For this, we should start with the head of the rebellion inside of the pit, Werner. Werner is the first person you meet when you start the quest. However, he is dishonest about his intentions, to say the least. The whole rescue my fellow people from a horrid leader and the mistreated slave thing? Well, not exactly the truth when it comes to Werner. He is real good at playing the victim, so who was he really before Werner escaped? Werner was not your regular slave back in the pit. He actually played an important role before he left. He was Asher's lieutenant. As Asher's second in command, he was in charge of maintaining the slavery in the pit. However, he betrayed him and was sent to the slave pens as punishment. Although Werner is terrible at fighting, he is good with technology, which is how he managed to deactivate and remove the slave collar from around his neck. He also, due to his cunning and deceptive opportunistic nature, managed to convince the other slaves within the pit of his plan to overthrow Asher. However, this was not for the greater good. Werner wanted to take over and manage the pit, continuing the place in its current condition only with him as its leader, without the research into the condition causing the Trogs, as that's not really all that profitable. So this would see the trend of slavery continuing in the pit with Werner profiting. However, he was able to convince the other slaves that it would not be this way. One of the important slaves that he convinced is Medea. Medea is essentially the leader of the slaves inside of the pit. She is one of the oldest people at the pit who wishes to free herself and the other slaves working under Asher. This is why she started working with Werner, coming up with the plan to take the baby not long after he was sent to the slave pens. Medea was also organizing the slaves in the preparation for the uprising to take over the pit. The plans involved getting an outsider who was healthy as a Trojan horse to steal the cure, which is where it rested on the lone wanderer, being you. Medea hints at her knowledge of the cure being a baby when she discusses with the lone wanderer how people are becoming sicker faster, turning into Trogs at a faster rate than in the past. She discusses how the cure is the only thing that has not become infected, alluding to the fact that the cure is in fact a living baby. Medea, like Werner, only sees the baby as a tool, rather than a child, which can be used as a bargaining chip for freedom. So the child's safety in the hands of either of them is questionable at best. Now we should discuss where the slaves are actually coming from. In the beginning of the quest, the number of slavers to slaves was actually quite high within the Capital Wasteland camp you visited. You will also find this across other slaver camps. With this, it could mean one of two things. Either A, the slavers are terrible at their jobs, or B, the slaves are being shipped elsewhere, this elsewhere being the pit, which we see with the many slaves being found within the pit. But how would this uprising go, considering the numbers are on the slave side, however not the weapons? Well, one of the slaves within the pit is technologically minded, this being Marco. Now he, on the side of his day job, working at the steel mill, has been creating improvised weapons for the slaves. This in part for the uprising. So during the Lone Wanderer's little meeting with Asher, they would use these as a way of fighting back against the pit raiders. With this, they planned that once Marie was handed over to Medea, the floodlights would be turned off, as this would attract the Trogs, who would essentially be used to attack anyone that stood in their way. Once the pit was overthrown, Medea would push for the slaves to be free. However, this would come at the cost of many lives. Let's checkpoint this. So now that we have heard about the two leaders of the pit slave uprising, and also a little about where the slaves are coming from, do they deserve the baby? With Marie being only seen as a tool by both Medea and Werner, it is likely that after the uprising, if research was to continue, the child would not be treated too kindly. It is also debatable on whether or not Werner would keep his promise to Medea about the slaves becoming freed. This is questionable due to his previous betrayal of Asher in the first place, considering he was the previous lieutenant of Asher, and this is not Werner's first attempt at overthrowing Asher. So loyalty is not something that Werner is really known for. This could cause further fighting to break out between Medea and Werner. So with Asher gone, the leadership within the pit may be a little unstable, meaning that the landscape of the pit could look completely different if one were to pass before the other, either naturally or unnaturally. With Marie only being seen as a tool for the uprising, it is unlikely that she would be safe afterward. The only thing guaranteeing her safety is that she holds the key to a cure. Once the cure is found, if they no longer need her, then they may no longer keep her around, getting rid of her like they got rid of her parents. Because of this section actually goes to the parents. But this is only one side of the story, to decide who gets the baby. We are going to need to hear the parents' side. We will begin with Ishmael Asher. His backstory is interesting, as before he was Lord of the Pit, he was actually an initiate with the Brotherhood of Steel. But how did he end up at the pit? Well, this is due to an event that would happen around 30 years before the Lone Wanderer would show up. This was an event known as the Scourge. Asher was brought there as an initiate, along with other members of the Brotherhood of Steel, as part of an expedition led by Owen Lyons. When they arrived at the pit, they were met with hostile creatures and raiders, leading to the decision to destroy anything willing to fight them, and take whatever technology they could find. If they could not take the technology, then they would destroy it. The operation to remove the pit from the map was a one-night-only show. However, the mission, although successful in removing the worst of what existed in the pit, at the time did have its casualties. Well, supposed casualties. With an explosion that occurred inside of the steel mill, this would trap Asher in the mill. He was assumed to have died from the explosion, so there was no rescue squad sent to retrieve him. After being left behind, Asher was found by what he described as tribals, who viewed him as a god. This was the start of rebuilding the city. This was the origin of the pit as we know it. Although this is not where his work would end, Pitt becoming a brand new and semi-functional city. Asher would need to cement his claim on the city. He would do this by taking on and killing the raider bosses still in the pit. Then he would essentially recruit the raiders into his own army, in part to provide security from other raiders and the Trogs, but also to control the slaves, which for Asher became a necessity. However, he preferred to term them workers, as these workers could earn their freedom or a place in the raiders he uses as soldiers. The purpose of these workers is in part due to the need for more people to keep the steel mill functional, but also due to the constant need to replace members of the workforce, considering 1 in 5 people become Trogs after being in the pit for prolonged periods of time without a cure. However, Asher's plans are not so innocent. Once he cures those inside of the pit, this also explains his use of the hole inside of the pit, using this as a way to weed out any weaklings from the city, having those who are his workers fight to the death, not for real freedom, but actually to join his army, as he calls his raiders soldiers, not raiders. With this, he does allow them to be strict towards the so-called workers. However, those soldiers who fall out of line and punish the workers too harshly are not immune to punishment. This is why we see mechs at the gate. This is punishment for injuring a worker. However, there are other punishments for soldiers who do worse. Those soldiers may become warning signs for those other soldiers, as they could be strung up for this behavior, if you get what I mean. But why exactly does Asher need an army? Well, in part to defend the pit, but also, after the cure is created, he desires to do more, this desire being to reunite the country as one, marching in and taking over. But to do that, he needs the cure, which for that we need to discuss his wife Sandra. Like with Asher, we should start with how she even got to the pit, considering she wasn't exactly born there. Well, Sandra was no damsel in distress slave kidnapped ending up forcefully working on the Trog cure. Nope, she was an educated woman who saw potential in the pit. She walked up to the pit and Asher saw potential in her, supporting her research. After some time, Sandra and Asher realized they loved each other. And the rest, well, after a couple of late nights and 9 months later, they have little baby Marie, providing them the progress they needed in child form. With this, Sandra would be able to learn a lot more from little Marie. However, considering that Marie is a baby, the progress has come slowly due to how fragile she is and also the fact that she is a little less than a year old. So they haven't exactly been able to run tests on her for a prolonged period. Nor can they ask her questions about if various experiments are causing her to have symptoms or feel odd in general. Even with this, with the prospect of the cure occurring, this drives Sandra's continued research. Which gets us to the after point. We know that Asher desires to unite the wastes of the former United States again. However, does Sandra even know about this? Interestingly enough, she actually does. And she supports his plan to take over the rest of the wastes. So let's checkpoint this. With this, little Marie is essentially being used as a tool to guarantee their city's ability to recover from TDC, and their ability to build an army, of course. Normally, when it comes to research, you first have to get approved by ethics, but last time I checked, the Capital Wastelands don't have ethics boards, so that is not an issue. Secondly, you have to have permission to experiment on people, from either the person or their parent. Considering that Marie is being experimented on by her own mother, it's a little concerning, but I guess she has parental permission. But hey, I guess you could label it as mother-daughter bonding time. Both Asher and Sandra would be using baby Marie as a pawn in their plans. Yes, they would be caring for her, but Sandra was using her for tests and experiments to create a cure. You could argue that this would be for the greater good, if she was not supportive of her husband's plan to expand. If the plan was only to create a cure to make the people of the pit healthy again, and to have the pit as a source of paid and fair work, rather than being the largest buyer from Paradise Falls, then the use of their daughter as a test subject could technically be seen as reasonable. Instead, the plan is to march into the wastelands and unite it as one. So this really just makes Marie a tool in building a strong army. So for this, that makes them not exactly the best parents. This is why a point goes to the rebels. Let's break down the scores and decide once and for all who gets the baby, starting with the point from the Trogs. With the workers in the pit being captured and forced to work in the pit, being exposed to the TDC under the rule of Little Marie's parents and the soldiers working under them, this exposure causing 1 in 5 of them to turn into wildmen and eventually Trogs, it is fair to say that without the presence of any of them there would be no need for research into the TDC, considering that none of them would be getting exposed to the disease. If there had been other arrangements or at least compensation for the work, then this would be less of an issue. This is why a point goes to the rebelling workers. Moving on to the slaves, their leaders, and their desires. This is where the issues start to arise with the slaves. Looking into Werner's history, he was originally enforcing the slavery inside of the pit. The only reason for his recent change in employment is really due to his greedy desire for power. His failed attempt at a coup within the pit. Trying to overthrow Asher previously is why he ended up as a slave. Werner is also not someone who cares about the slaves, only really cares about power and himself. So he sees this as an opportunity to gain power, with or without having to break a few promises. Medea, the other leader of this rebellion, does have a different perspective when it comes to the slaves. She cares about them, and wants herself and the others to be free. However, both Medea and Werner only see little Marie as a tool. So whether or not the child is looked after and research is continued, or she is removed from the pit like her parents, that really will depend on Medea and Werner's desires for the pit. The lack of ability to research is why their ability to take Marie and create a cure is also questionable. This also may suggest that Marie will be raised as a regular member of the pit or other settlement if she was being forced out of the settlement, no longer having her as a guinea pig. Due to the potential lack of stability when it comes to leadership in the rebellion, with Medea wanting them to be free and Werner only really wanting the power that comes with the position of Lord of the Pit, it is hard to judge what would happen with the child. Also, due to them seeing her as only a pawn, this leads to concerns about her safety. With no guarantee of what they would do to her, they also have no skilled scientists or anyone with knowledge of medicine, so them being able to actually make a cure is questionable. There was also no guarantee she would not just be made into mystery meat stew. Speaking of food, if you were eating whilst watching this, let me know in the comments what you were eating. Marie was only ever seen as a tool for freedom and nothing else by the uprising slaves. This is why, in this section, point goes to the parents. Moving on to those parents, Asher and Sandra both see little Marie as an opportunity, not only to cure the pit, but to create a strong army. As with all of the members of the pit being healthy, they are able to create a strong enough force to conquer more of the wasteland. With their experimenting on a baby, it is questionable if this could be considered reasonable, as the child has no way of asking them to stop, tell them how the tests make her feel either. So for this, only seeing her as a tool in the future of expanding an empire, point goes to the uprising slaves. This makes 2 points for the slaves and 1 point for the parents. With the removal of Marie from her parents, there is no guarantee of after. However, it is evident with Asher's holotape diaries to Marie that there was a danger in this position she was held in, leading to him being concerned enough to leave voice recordings for the future Marie.
Now I hope you're hearing this 10 years from now. Sitting on my knees safe and sound. Right about now, I bet I'm looking pretty silly. But things don't always work out the way we'd like. There are a lot of risks, including what your mother would do if she heard me talking like this.
This points to the situation in the pit already being unstable, of course with Werner's own attempt at a coup, but also with the others in the pit becoming unsettled. So her being there was already dangerous. There is potential for her with the freed slaves to live out a relatively normal life, if she is permitted to do so, or even for research to continue on the search for the cure, as Sandra is not the only scientist in the wasteland. We saw that with Project Purity, there are others. Marie would no longer be part of creating an army, and the slaves would have the opportunity to get away from the TDC and the pit. So for this, it is better to hand Marie to the slaves. Let me know in the comments who you think baby Marie should be placed with. If you enjoyed this video, then you will enjoy this video. It is about the main quest in Fallout 3 and whether or not it makes sense.